there are some certain strange rules in the educational system. Uh, normally, an Indian professor will be offered 2/3 of the salary of a British professor. For what reason? Having the same education, having the same duties. Just the colonial masters decided that. And then, by virtue of his temporary post, his post was a temporary one, he would draw half of that. So he was drawing 1/3 of the salary of all the counterparts, fellow professors. So he thought this is a very unjust situation. His childhood was rather unusual for a middle class boy. See, his father put him into a pathshala instead of a regular school where English language is taught and other instructions are happening in vernacular language. If in his case it was Bengali, but he was first put into a pathshala, which was the traditional schools which was running even before the British had come here. So Hertz EM waves, they are still called Hertz EM waves. Later on they started becoming, they are called electric waves. So Bose used the term electric waves. The 5 millimeter waves or 3 millimeter waves that he was generating, and he measured the wavelength very accurately. Frequency is known, multiply them, got the speed, and lo and behold, that speed is exactly the same as speed of light. All this work exists there in the Proceedings of the Royal Society, London. But if you look at modern textbooks, you will find the entire credit is given to Hertz. He measured the speed, he showed that they are electromagnetic waves, etc., etc. And Indian authors like, there is a book called Concepts of Physics, which is read by all Indian students by H.C. Verma, Dr. H.C. Verma, my colleague at IIT Kanpur. It's a very good book, very nice book, wonderfully written book. And that book has the same error.
Namaste. Very good morning to everybody present over here today. Today we have with us Kunal Ghosh ji. Now, what is he going to talk about? So his topic would be Unsung Genius, a life of Jagadish Chandra Bose. Let us know about Kunal ji. Kunal Ghosh ji has been a professor at an HOD of Aerospace Engineering, IIT Kanpur. After retirement, he worked as a professor at the Institute of Aeronautical Engineering, Hyderabad. Today's topic is very interesting, and we are going to learn about something we have never heard before. And therefore, not taking much time, we would like him to speak on this topic and let us know about the things we haven't heard before. Thank you so much. Please, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, and my student friends, let me first apologize that I have become quite infirm. You have seen, I'm about 77-year-old, more than that. So, there are shortcomings. I have a knee replacement and all that. So, I apologize for this. Now, I am going to talk on Sir Jagadish Chandra Bose. I am going to start from his childhood. His childhood was rather unusual for a middle class boy. See, his father put him into a pathshala instead of a regular school where English language is taught and other instructions are happening in vernacular language. If in his case it was Bengali, but he was first put into a Pathshala, which was the traditional schools, which was running even before the British had come here. So there he wanted his son to be anchored in the ancient traditions of India, reading Mahabharata and Ramayana and various scriptures from the Vedas, the lives of the rishis and munis. So this is the anchoring he received, and this really set the tone of his personality for the rest of his life. For instance, he believed that his inventions should never be patented, because he thought that in ancient India knowledge was never restricted. It was widely broadcast and freely broadcast to everyone, whosoever can benefit from it. So he never wanted to patent anything. But he ended up patenting later on because of certain reasons that we shall see. And his father belonged to the Brahmo Samaj, people who did not believe in idolatry. They used to worship Nirakar Brahma. And it was, so his father belonged to that Samaj, he followed that faith, and he inherited that, obviously, very strongly. That we shall see its influences later on. And from his childhood, he was very attracted to nature and had a very spontaneous, hands-on approach. For instance, near where they lived, there was a stream over which there was a wooden bridge. It was a curved bridge, arched bridge, you can say it was. And when the river or the stream was in spate in the rainy season, he would go and stand over that bridge and look at the rushing waters, and he marveled at it. And later on, wherever he went, he created a replica of this. This is a very special character. So later on, his father became, initially he was a headmaster, then he became a deputy magistrate. And he was posted in Bardhaman district, and there he was given a house with a very large compound, and there was a malaria epidemic. And this gentleman, his father's name was Bhagwan Chandra Bose, was a very public spirited man. He wholeheartedly did relief for malaria suffering people. And there are many orphans, many parents died, the orphans remained. So he thought of something to do for the orphans, particularly the boys, and he said they should be trained. So inside his house, inside the compound of his huge house surrounded by a huge compound, in one corner he had instituted a foundry shop, a smithy shop, and a carpentry shop, where these orphan boys would be trained. And Bose was then 12 years old, and there was a foundry shop. So what he did, he persuaded his mother to part with family brass, and he asked the foundry man to melt that brass, and he designed a cannon, a small toy cannon, and that was then cast. So a brass cannon was made, and it could actually be charged with gunpowder and fired. So at the age of 12, can you imagine this? And then in one corner he had a little housing for his pets, and he used to tend to those pets of various animals. His love for animals and love for nature. And then what his father put him in a school called Hare School in Calcutta at the age of 12. and he used to live in a hostel which was run by the Brahmo Samaj. So all the boys were Brahmos, but they're all much older boys, teenage boys, or even older, late teenage boys, and he was only 12. So they more or less ignored the little chap. So how did he spend his time? In one corner of the compound, he created a little garden, and then he so arranged with the help of a hand pump, the little stream will flow, and he built a bridge over that and created the stream and the bridge of his childhood there. And he did it all by himself. He used his father used to give him some allowance as pocket money. He used that money to buy a pump and some carpentry tools, and he made that. So this is the kind of person whose development we are following. Then he was put into St. Xavier's School in Calcutta. If only 3 or 4 months he was in Hare School. And in St. Xavier's School, all his classmates were British. And they all spoke English. He didn't speak any English. The medium of instruction was English. So can you imagine? He was a country boy, shifted into the middle of this city boys who were all British, white skinned, and this man was there, this little boy was there, who didn't speak English, who didn't know English. He had to adjust, he had to cope with that, and he coped successfully with that. Picked up English very quickly, and he did quite well in his studies. So this is the kind of person we are dealing with. And then of course he was, for instance, I've forgotten to tell you his date of birth. He was in 1858, 30th November. And yes, I've covered this. Yes, this is another thing. When he was in Pathshala, his schoolmates were children of farmers, fishermen, and cow herds and so on. So, but a normal middle class boy in those days were not put into such a school. He used to go to a school where English would be taught, medium will be vernacular, but all other things are followed or modeled on a British school in England. So he was put into a traditional school. And then he was in Hare School in Calcutta, which I have covered, and then he was in St. Xavier's College. So this transition from one to other is very fast. He had only 3 months time in Hare School, where he had a little bit of cushion. Then into St. Xavier's School, where all the classmates were British, and he often used to have fights with them as usual, because they'll pick on him because he's the only non-white person there. Then he went to Cambridge. His family was reasonably well-to-do. They could finance his education. He went to Cambridge and he studied physics, as you know. Initially, of course, he wanted to study medicine, but for some reason he shifted. I have to cut short. The talk will become too long without going into the details. And after doing his degree, he came back and joined Presidency College, Calcutta. And there are some certain strange rules in the educational system. Normally, an Indian professor will be offered 2/3 of the salary of a British professor. For what reason? Having the same education, having the same duties. Just the colonial masters decided that. And then by virtue of his temporary post, his post was a temporary one, he would draw half of that. So he was drawing 1/3 of the salary of all the counterparts, fellow professors. So he thought this is a very unjust situation. So he wrote a letter saying that I am not going to accept any salary. I am going to teach. I'll do all my duties, but I'll not accept any salary. And he did not accept any salary as a protest. So how would he support himself? His sister and brother-in-law, Ananda Mohan Bosu, they supported him. So he refused to accept salary for a long time, and then of course eventually there was a little bit of a turmoil in the British bureaucracy that this man is doing a very good job, and in fact the principal Tony and director of education Alfred Croft, these two gentlemen became his admirers because the quality of his teaching and the amount of labor he used to put in. They thought, well, this is really injustice that he is not taking his salary and doing this job. And he used to do everything else like setting syllabus, setting exam papers, grading exam papers and all that. So eventually he received all his salaries, arrears, at the rate of the British professors' salaries after a long time. And then he put all that money into buying securities, which came in handy when he wanted to build the Bose Institute. Here, when he approached the authorities that why the salary is 1/3 or initially 2/3 and then 1/3 because of a temporary position, this 2/3 ratio was explained like this, that the Europeans have a phrenological bump in the cranium of their head. So that makes them a superior race to rest of the world people. So this is a very strange theory which was prevalent among the Europeans at that time. Now of course this is all proven to be hogwash, and there is no phrenological bump found in the European race, and the level of intelligence is no greater, just the same. So they had a theory which was actual a physiological basis for racial discrimination. Then he wanted to do research, and the college had no policy of research. So that your duty is only teaching, and that's all. Teaching and associated activities. Research is your own business, no finance available. So he says, but I need space. I said, all right. They gave an annex to a bathroom, a small annex to a bathroom for his research laboratory. He started his research laboratory there. The financing from his own earnings, own savings. And then the college objected that you cannot do research during the college hours. You have to do research outside the college hours, which means he has to stay back in the evenings and do research, spending his own money, building his own instruments, everything from scratch. He did all that. He said, I have to accept the challenge. He did all that. He employed a tinsmith who was operating a small business nearby. His name is Barada Prasanna Ghosh, and he employed his services to build his own instruments. He designed his own instruments and made them. At that point, Sister Nivedita entered his life. Sister Nivedita and Sara Chapman Bull, you can see their photographs. The extreme left is Sister Nivedita, in the middle is Sara Chapman Bull. These two ladies, they had come to Calcutta. They are of course disciples of Swami Vivekananda, and they visited his laboratory and they heard about his name, and they visited his laboratory and became friends with him. And Thereafter, Sister Nivedita used to help him. He also set up a laboratory in his own house. The upper story of his house is set up another laboratory. And Sister Nivedita used to visit in both places. And Sister Nivedita's background is a very brilliant background. We don't know much about it. Normally, we know that she followed Swami Vivekananda into India and gave a lot of services, ran a girls' school and all that. But before that, her high school background is very brilliant. He excelled in all subjects, including science. And she knew mechanics and she knew botany. And then she, in his professional life, she became a science reviewer. And she was the secretary of the CSAME club. The CSAME club was a club of intellectuals in London, whose members were George Bernard Shaw, Y.W. Yeats, and Patrick Geddes, all these illustrious individuals. They were members of CSAME club, and she was the secretary of that club. So, which means that in the London circle of intellectuals, she was a star. Her level of knowledge and accomplishment was such. And then she gave all that up, landed in Calcutta with just 1 rupee in her pocket, nothing more. And she was received by Swami Vivekananda at the docks. And thereafter, of course, we know that she was running a girls' school in Calcutta. So she and Mrs. Sara Chapman Bull, who is an American lady, and Swami Vivekananda called him mother. So she is considered the American mother of Swami Vivekananda. And Sara Chapman Bull was a very wealthy lady, but she was a saint. She spent all her money for good things. And she was the widow of Ole Bull, a very famous violinist who was a Norwegian. And Ole Bull studied the history of violin, and it originated in India. The instruments, string instruments with the bow, that's the origin, and it came from India. And Ole Bull was a very spiritual person also, and he was attracted towards India, although he never came to India. So Sara Chapman Bull imbibed all those qualities from her husband, and she was widowed very early. After that, she never married, and she was not interested. She was really a saint, and Swami Vivekananda exactly called her that. Then you see the photograph of Josephine Macleod, who is again a disciple of Swami Vivekananda, but she never said that I am a disciple. She said I am his friend. And these three ladies, they rendered help to Bose in all kinds of fashions, in every possible way. For instance, there was a clash between Bose and Sir John. His name is Sir John Burden Sanderson. He is a very famous physiologist, and Bose shifted from physics to physiology. And physiologists in England, they said that why are you making this shift? There was a kind of caste attitude that a physicist cannot enter the field of physiology at that time prevailing in England. And Bose called it exactly that. He called it a caste etiquette that I broke. Being a physicist, I entered the field of plant physiology. He became a botanist, and that is again something very unusual. A person doing frontline research in two completely unrelated fields. Where is physics and where is botany? But I am not going to talk about his botanical aspects of research here. I will confine myself to his electrical and electronics aspect of research. Of course, the word electronics was not there at that time. So, whenever so these physiologists, they stopped all his publications. He would do research in physiology and then he will send his papers to the Proceedings of the Royal Society where it would be published. His physics papers were all published there, and these gentlemen, out of pique and caste etiquette, they stopped his publications. So his only recourse was to publish books, but he had no money. So who would finance? Mrs. Sara Chapman Bull, the wealthy lady, she financed all the books that he wrote, and they were published by Longman and Company in London. And those books were read all over Europe, and then he started getting invitations from various countries because his research was so brilliant. And of course, one more person must be mentioned. His teacher in Cambridge, Lord Raleigh. Lord Raleigh used to come to his aid. Sometimes he arranged finance for him, sometimes he would arrange an invitation there where he can present his research and arrange the meetings and the conferences, etc. in every possible way. He came to Calcutta to visit his laboratory and quite impressed by what he was doing in the laboratory. And he knew that the circumstances are extremely difficult. He would do all the day's work. In the evenings, he'll stay back, spend his own money in a small annexe to the bathroom where he would do his research with the help of a tinsmith who locally runs a shop and does a business. Can you imagine how difficult it is? So his books were all published by Sara Chapman Bull, and the publisher was London's Longman and Co. I'd like to dwell a little on, I have to really deliver a discontinuous narration. There's no choice, time limits, and he was working on electric waves, which initially was called Hertz EM waves, because you have all heard of James Clerk Maxwell, right? Physics people. Physicists here? James Clerk Maxwell, Maxwell's laws. Any of you? No? Students of physics here? Anyway, so he's a very famous figure, Maxwell. Maxwell had predicted, in fact, he gave the character of electromagnetic waves, that there is electrical vibration and then there is a magnetic vibration, and they move lockstep, and in two mutually perpendicular directions they happen, and they proceed in the third direction. My book has a diagram. If you are interested, you can look at that diagram. That explains it. Now, Maxwell had predicted that electromagnetic waves exist outside the solar spectrum. Solar spectrum, of course, the VIBGYOR we know from violet to infrared, there are all electromagnetic waves. But he said there are waves which are a much smaller frequency and larger frequency. On both sides of the solar spectrum, there are electromagnetic waves. He predicted that. But it had to be experimentally verified. People were not accepting it. Physicists were not convinced that Maxwell is correct. Maxwell in the meantime died. Hertz, a German scientist, who first produced these waves, and to prove that they are electromagnetic waves, they had to be proven to observe the laws of the light. What are the laws? Simple laws, and all physicists here or all high school students would know. The law of reflection. The angle of reflection is equal to the angle of incidence, you all know. Then the law of refraction, that sin I by sin r is a constant, right? I am not seeing getting any response from science students here. Is it right? Not? You have all studied this or no? Okay, good. Then one thing perhaps you may not have studied is polarization. You have studied reflection, refraction, diffraction also you may have studied, but polarization you might not have. It might not be included in the high school. Now, to prove that this wave is electromagnetic, one has to show that it observes all these laws. That is, law of reflection, law of refraction, diffraction phenomena must take place, and polarization. So, we shall confine ourselves to the first two. Other two are diffraction there is no law. It just diffraction means a wave when it encounters an obstacle, it goes round it. Like water waves, you put a wall, the water wave will go round it. You can all see, even in a swimming pool, you can make an experiment and see that. Create waves by splashing water, and you can see if you put an obstruction, it will go round the obstruction and shake the water on the other side. These are very simple experiments. So, the reflection and refraction will focus on these two. So, Hertz generated a wave outside the solar spectrum. Now, he had to show that the waves observe these two laws, simple laws. Sin I by sin r is a constant, and law of reflection. For the time being, I am confining to these two. Now, he tried to reflect the wave with a mirror. Unfortunately, his wave length was 66 centimeter. What is the wavelength of sun rays? In nanometers. So, enormous difference, 66 centimeters and nanometer, enormous difference. So, he arranged huge mirrors, because his wavelength was so large, huge mirrors are necessary. So, built huge mirrors with zinc surface, zinc plating. But unfortunately, those mirrors, although they are very large, meters long, still was not large enough for these waves. The waves will go round it. So, rectilinear travel has to be ensured to ensure the law of reflection. But waves are not traveling rectilinearly. Rectilinearly means along the straight line. I am using technical language, so I explain. Whenever you have any difficulty, please ask. So, straight line movement of the rays could not be ensured. So, he could not prove systematically that the waves that he had generated are electromagnetic waves. He could not prove. Now, Bose comes along and he gave up the field and started doing something else. Bose comes along in 1894 and he says, I will try to prove this. So, he had an uncanny genius for invention. He straight away generated waves which are 3 to 5 millimeters long, 66 centimeter and 3 to 5 millimeters. What's the ratio? About 130. So, and then with normal sized mirrors and prisms, reflection and refraction were possible, and he proved that law of reflection is perfectly obeyed, law of refraction is also obeyed, and he proceeded to show that the waves generated by him could be polarized by normal crystals just like light. So, he proved everything and showed that the law of electromagnetic waves exist outside the solar spectrum. Now, if you look at modern textbooks, you will find that the entire credit is given to Hertz, and Bose's name is missing. But Hertz actually could not prove it. He was the first to generate such waves. Then Hertz tried to measure the speed. Again, his method was had defects. It was not theoretically wrong, but the experimental procedure had defects. So he could not measure the speed of light properly. Now Bose had an ingenious experiment where the wavelength was measured very accurately, extremely accurately, and wavelength measured by multiplied by frequency is the speed of light, or the speed of a wave. So very simple. Frequency is number of cycles per second. Wavelength measured in nanometers, meters, centimeters, millimeters, whatever. If you multiply these two factors, you get the speed of the wave. Whether it is water wave or whether it is light wave, whether it is any wave. That's the formula. So he measured the wavelength very accurately by his very ingenious method, which I will not be able to describe here because it requires firstly a lot of diagrams and then integrate physics, which is not necessary and outside the scope of this lecture. And that paper was called a paper of special excellence by the physicists of London. It was reviewed by all the famous physicists, and they decided that this is too brilliant a stuff, and they conferred DSc degree in absentia. He was not even required to go to London, defend his thesis, orally examined. All those procedures were waived because it is paper of special excellence. So once the wavelength is properly measured, what remains is frequency. Now, wave generator has a certain circuits, RC circuits are there, RCL circuits. So, from the circuit parameters, the frequency is known in advance. We call it known a priori. That's a technical scientific language. From the frequency parameters, from the circuit parameters of the instrument which is generating the waves, the frequency of the waves are known to the scientist a priori. So frequency is known, and he measured the wavelength very accurately, and the two are multiplied, you get the speed of the wave. So Hertzian waves, they are still called Hertzian waves. Later on they started becoming, they are called electric waves. So Bose used the term electric waves. The 5 millimeter waves or 3 millimeter waves that he was generating, and he measured the wavelength very accurately. Frequency is known, multiply them, got the speed, and lo and behold, that speed is exactly the same as speed of light. All this work exists and there in the Proceedings of the Royal Society, London. But if you look at modern textbooks, you will find the entire credit is given to Hertz. He measured the speed, he showed that they are electromagnetic waves, etc., etc. And Indian authors like, there is a book called Concepts of Physics, which is read by all Indian students by H.C. Verma, Dr. H.C. Verma, my colleague at IIT Kanpur. It's a very good book, very nice book, wonderfully written book. And that book has the same error. So Bose is never given any credit for the work he has done. In the field of electric waves, I am not talking about botany now. This is number one. That's why my topic is Unsung Genius. That's the name of my book also. He's not given the due credit. And then, of course, you know the Marconi affair. Now, of course, it has been proven beyond all doubts that Bose's Calcutta town hall experiment was the first experiment by which wireless communication was shown. So, what he was doing, I am jumping, can't help. In Presidency College, on the terrace he put an aerial, and his residence was 1 mile off away. On that terrace he put another aerial, and he was transmitting waves from Presidency College laboratory to his house. He was signaling his wife. And there was a professor called John Pedler. He became Bose's admirer. He was British, but not like all Britishers he was. Others were jealous of his research ability. Pedler was an admirer, and he records this, that he's transmitted these waves 1 mile from Presidency College to his house with the help of aerials. The first concert of aerials comes. And then the fact that he was doing this and he was showing his colleagues that he was doing attracted publicity. And then the Lieutenant Governor of Calcutta, or Calcutta Presidency rather, not just the city. Calcutta Presidency was a huge. Bihar, Bengal, Assam, they are all part of Calcutta Presidency. Sir John Mackenzie, Lieutenant Governor, he heard about these experiments. So he was curious. So Bose arranged an experiment in Calcutta Town Hall. So Mackenzie was a very fat person, and Bose was humorous. What he did was, he put Mackenzie and put his instruments quite close to his belly, and at the top, and then he put up an aerial, and 3 large halls later, separated by very thick walls, he put his receiving instruments. Again, there was an aerial, and he generated the wave, let it pass through the fat body of the governor, Lieutenant Governor, through 3 thick walls. In the other room, he exploded a crucible containing gunpowder. He fired a pistol. He arranged to catapult an iron ball, and he rang a telephone. All at once, simultaneously. He arranged that experiment. And that experiment became widely published all over the world, publicized all over the world. And Marconi, why Marconi? Everybody heard about it. Everybody read in the English literature about that experiment. And then let me talk a little bit about Marconi now, where he enters. Marconi's mother was an English lady, and from the Jameson family of London, and they were distillers, that is, manufacturers of liqueur, whiskey and all those things. So extremely rich. She is a very wealthy lady, and she married a baron of Italy. So Baron Marconi was owner of an estate, Bologna estate in Italy. So Marconi, his name is Guglielmo Marconi. So I will distinguish by Baron Marconi and Guglielmo Marconi, father and son. Now Guglielmo Marconi grew up in Bologna, and of course he was given some kind of education by tutors, and he learned much about electricity and all these things, and he was curious, and his mother brought him to London, and he was fluent in both English and Italian, and he was equally at home in both societies. His mother was English, and from childhood he used to spend time in England. So here the Jamieson family, the very rich Jamieson family, one of the richest families of London, was at his beck and call. They arranged everything for him smoothly. And in Italy, of course, his father, the Baron, again very rich. So in London, he did certain experiments with these waves, and he applied for a patent where he was showing which featured an aerial. The first patent that he applied for had a reflector, not an aerial of these waves, and he showed that with these waves he could transmit message by using the Morse code. Now Morse code is nowadays out of date, but until 20 years ago it was very much in vogue in this country. We used to send telegrams from one place to another. Anybody who's above 40 would know this. Nowadays, of course, we have the cell phone and all that. There's no Morse code. Morse code is with the help of a dash and a dot. The entire message is conveyed only by two symbols. And the Morse code is a complicated affair. Anyway, so he showed that with the help of these electric waves, he could transmit the Morse code communication, Morse code mode of communication, from one place to another, and with the aerials, with a reflector. He applied for this patent. The patent was rejected, but said there is no diagram in it, you have to include diagrams, so you can resubmit it. So now what he does, in between, he visited Captain Henry Jackson. Now Henry Jackson was a captain of a ship which was a ship operating torpedoes, and he was training cadets who would operate torpedoes. And Henry Jackson, he read about Bose's town hall experiment, and he was interested, and he acknowledged Bose in his writings, that from this I have learned, and this is what I am doing. He erected an aerial in one corner of the ship, and near the bow, another aerial at the tail. In between, of course, there is housing, tall housing, big ship, and he was transmitting signal from one end of the boat to the other end. So his purpose was that an approaching torpedo should be able to warn a friendly ship. For instance, if a war going on between England and Germany, an English operated torpedo is approaching an English boat or ship, it should give an advance warning that I am taking this route. That's why he was doing it. He was a torpedo engineer. Now, and he acknowledges that. And his obituary after he died, after becoming admiral, also says this. It's a written record that he read about the Calcutta town hall experiment of Bose, and he took the idea of the aerials and transmission of waves and communication through Marconi visited him in between, and then he wrote another document for the patent, and then this time instead of a reflector he included the aerials, and he included the Morse code, and he claimed that he is the first one to use these two things. Now this patent was granted because patent office does not have so much of manpower and trained manpower to check out all these things, that who's the actual inventor and who's claiming to be the inventor. They don't have it. So this patent was granted. After the patent was granted, one scientist called Sylvester Thompson, Sylvanus Thompson, he became enraged because he knew that these two things are not Marconi's creation. He is falsely claiming it. So the Morse code transmission was first done by Lodge with the help of electric waves, and aerials were first done by Bose, and Marconi was claiming to be the inventor of both. So there was a murky exchange of letters attacking and Marconi defending, and they are all published in a journal called Electrical something. This journal which published all this. Now, so Marconi's habit of stealing was apparent right from the beginning, and he did the same with Bose. He used Bose's receiver with a telephone to receive the signal in his famous transatlantic experiment. Now I have, can somebody operate this? I show the picture where Marconi was doing this. No, further on. Yes, look at this picture. Yes, it's a very interesting picture. You see, there is the first floor, ground floor and the first floor. From the first floor, a wire goes out, and as a kite is being flown, the kite has antenna. Kite is not a normal kite. It's an aerial. At that time, it was called aerial because you can see square wires inside the kite. Can you see that? So it is an aerial which is lifted by the wind, because aerial has to be lifted very high. So Marconi was receiving the signal through this aerial inside that little house in the first floor of the house, and this is in Newfoundland, Canada. This Signal Hill it is called, and the transmission is coming from England, from Cornwall, the western corner of England. In between there are about 6,000 miles, and he used Bose's receiver with a telephone for receiving this signal. Now all this has been proven now by a scientific researcher called P. Bandyopadhyay. He is in NASA. He is a scientific historian employed by NASA, USA, and these are all published in the journals of IEEE. There are 3 papers where he exposes Marconi, how he stole and what he did, etc., etc., beyond every doubt. And in fact, can you show the earlier figures? I can just, yes, you can see this one is Marconi's instrument which he patented. There are 2 pistons, and there is a drop of mercury in between the 2 pistons, connecting the 2 pistons. Can you see that little black drop between the 2 pistons? You can see this is one piston, this white piece up to here, and this is another piston. So this is being pushed from this side, this is being pushed from that side. This is the mercury blob, a drop of mercury, K. Here it is, K, drop of mercury. You can all see, right? See, this is one piston. Up up to this point is a piston, and this is another piston. This is being pushed from this side. This is being pushed from that side. This K is the drop of mercury. So this mercury contact is the crucial thing in this instrument. This is a receiver. This whole thing is a receiver of electric waves, which is wireless waves. And can I have the Bose's next one? Yes, yeah. This is the one by Bose. Schematic diagram of the mercury auto coherer or self-restoring coherer invented by Bose. Yes. See, this term auto coherer, coherer means a receiver. At that time, this term was in vogue. Now, it is just a receiver of a wave, a receiver of a wireless message. And auto means, see, those coherers at that time, they need to be shaken after receiving every event of reception. They needed to be shaken. And Bose invented this one, which did not need to be shaken. So that's why this term auto comes in. It's automatically shaken coherer or whatever it means. And it did not have to be shaken anyway. This instrument will receive, and a circuit will complete here, a battery and a galvanometer. And in fact, there is one diagram with which I'll show. Yes, you can see this one. This is a galvanometer, this is a battery, and this is the Branly receiver. And once the wave impinges on it, the galvanometer needle moves. And then one comes to know a wave has been received. So imagine the same thing. Now bring back Bose's receiver. Imagine the same circuitry here, a battery and a galvanometer, and this circuit is complete. Okay. So this then becomes a receiver. As soon as the wave comes, it receives and the galvanometer moves, needle moves, and the reception is clear. So this is the very crude instrument, but these were the frontline research those days. Nowadays it is considered very crude. Now Bose's paper with this instrument, which you're seeing, was published in Royal Society proceedings in London. Now Marconi stole the aerial, and there's the difference between this and Marconi's is trivial. It's a horizontal and this is a U-tube. This is the difference. Everything else is the same. And he patented that. He never published papers. He always took the route of a patent, because patent offices didn't have the capacity to verify everything. Usually patents are more easily done, granted. So this receiver coupled with a telephone is the most sensitive one Bose found, and the human ear. Bose discovered this. It's the best method of reception. And Marconi used exactly the same in his transatlantic transmission. And this has all been proven now beyond all doubt and published in IEEE journal. In consecutive 3 papers expose Marconi like this. And now, see, Bose-Marconi affair is covered. Now I'll just come back to those 3 ladies that we had talked about. See, Nivedita was a constant companion of Bose. Even in summer when Bose will go to Darjeeling, he will take Nivedita with him. Bose, Obala Bose, his wife, and Nivedita, they are constantly together. After Nivedita died in 1911, Bose wrote a series of letters to Josephine Macleod, which showed how close he was to Josephine Macleod. Those letters are sad reading. They are tearful letters that I cannot bear her non-existence. He is absolutely grief-stricken, and for about several months he could not do any research. And those letters have been found, and my book gives those letters. Otherwise, Josephine Macleod's all papers were destroyed by white ant because of wrong upkeep. Another letter of Josephine Macleod has been found where he writes to Bose when Bose was in London that please give me an estimate that how much money you require to build your laboratory and how many years and time wise, like first year you need this fund, second year you need this fund, etc. Then I'll raise funding in America. Josephine Macleod writes this to Bose when he is in London, and Nivedita is with him. Nivedita read that letter, and he immediately writes back to Josephine Macleod that please don't write such letters, because fortunately now we are in London, so the letter is not censored, but had it been in India, it would be censored. And Bose's activities were viewed with suspicion, and the British administrators were there doing their best to stop him from doing research. And Nivedita, of course, had connection with freedom fighters, and all her letters were being censored all the time. And she knew it, that letters are being censored. And Bose's association with Nivedita itself was a matter of great suspicion. So this letter also exists. So we know that Josephine Macleod's contribution to Bose, we just get a hint of it, that how much she was doing. And Sara Chapman Bull, of course, every book that Bose published was financed by her. His laboratory was entirely financed by her, not entirely, some of it is his own finance, but major part of it came from her. When Bose fell in London, the best surgeon was arranged, the best hospital was arranged by her. She nursed him for a month along with Abala Bose. All this contribution. And this man, he never acknowledged. He would never acknowledge. No acknowledgement whatsoever. He was following a matter of policy. He writes a letter to Rabindranath Tagore, his fast friend, very good friend, who is also a Brahmo. And there he writes that your short story Chuti has been translated into English. The lady who translated it is going to leave us soon, going to Northern Ireland. Who is this lady? Nivedita, we know. Nivedita translated the short story into English. But in the letter, Nivedita's name will not be taken. Is not being taken. And then in the same letter he writes, this story is read by an American aristocratic lady, and she shed profuse tears. Who is this American aristocratic lady? Sara Chapman Bull. But in the letter he won't mention her name, but accepting all possible help. I just told you what are the helps. From Nivedita, from Sara Chapman Bull, from Josephine Macleod, and no acknowledgement whatsoever. But he is acknowledging Rabindranath Tagore at every step. He is acknowledging all his Brahmo friends. But he would not acknowledge these. So what is this but opportunism? If you are so against idolaters, people who do idol worship and who followers of Swami Vivekananda, then don't take help from them. You take every possible help and then don't acknowledge. This is another side of his character. So I think I have dealt with Marconi, dealt with his character and dealt with his childhood. And of course I have dealt with the positive side of his character also. How he stood up against the British and refused to take his salary till the situation is corrected. Of course he is a genius. His inventions are the absolute signs of genius. I just mentioned, it's not there in this. You see, the experiment of polarization, the European scientists were doing this with enormous equipments, all made of steel and copper, etc., polarization. And you know how Bose did polarize? He took the thickest book available, which was a railway timetable of India, and he polarized the wave with the help of that. How did it occur to him that this will polarize? It did polarize. There is absolute evidence of this. So this is the mark of a genius. There are many such character things. In fact, even in his botany, he was the first to measure the photosynthetic activity of a plant and the rate at which the oxygen was being emitted by the plant. He built an instrument which measured it. That's the first in the world. That photosynthesis measurement was done on photosynthesis. How much oxygen was being released by photosynthesis. You know that animals, they take oxygen and release carbon dioxide, and plants, they absorb carbon dioxide and release oxygen. This is the photosynthesis. So this is the measure of his genius. There are many other things.
So, namaste, sir. Thank you so much for a wonderful lecture. Actually, today we've talked about some of the history that has been rewritten. And so it just seems that a lot of our scientists also were not acknowledged in our science and STEM fields also. Right? So, like for example, you're saying J.C. Bose was not acknowledged for his contribution, and we have never read about we know about Bose speakers. I'm guessing they were named after him. Is that true?
Bose speakers are not by the same Bose.
Not by the same Bose. I'm just wondering. So that was one. Also, I've heard that Ramanujan, a lot of the satellite and space research is attributable to the Ramanujan equations, So, and now, when you're saying that he has invented the semiconductor diode, I think I read that, even though you didn't mention that.
Yeah, I forgot to mention it.
Yes.
You see, at the turn of this century,
right,
1999, just 23 years ago, okay,
right,
24 years ago, science historians are looking at the history of semiconductor diode, which is an essential item of radio. For a very long time it was. Now of course transistor has arrived. So, and they looked at the patent history in US and they found that the first semiconductor diode was attributed to Bose, and patent one, yes. You can see there are 3 patents. You read the encircled thing, if it is readable, you can read, I suppose. It is attributed to Bose and Sara Chapman Bull. Can you see that?
right.
All 3 patents.
So that means that a lot of the modern, electronics and computer industry has a lot to thank an achiever like J.C. Bose.
Yes, yes.
And also the space research has Ramanujan to thank for, a lot of the equations that he, so, that sort of contribution of Indians to modern science is somehow not visible to us, even though we I come from the United States, and a lot of the, the Silicon Valley or the, tech industry is upheld by, on the shoulders of Indian, computer tech workers. So I think we know the genealogy from which we come, which is why I guess, some things that maybe the narration needs to be changed in science as well, is what I'm trying to say. At least hopefully our textbooks in India will do that.
Yes, so history of science as such is not a very cultivated subject in this country. But that is the lacuna that we have to fill. Because we are weak in history of science, we are being bulldozed by Western propaganda, if I may say. For instance, everything is attributed to Hertz regarding waves. He measured the speed, he showed that it is electromagnetic waves, but this is not correct. But World Encyclopedia actually does some justice. It says that Hertz could not prove these things, although he was the first to generate such waves, but he could not prove these things. Later scientists did this. It's silent on who the later scientist is. So it's not an empty bottle, half empty bottle, half full. So, and these patents, Bose was dead against taking patents, you know that. He has written everywhere. In fact, in the Bose Institute's preamble, he has written that no patent ever will be taken by the research done by people here. It's written there. I don't know whether they observe it or not now. But he himself took 3 patents because he was practically forced by Sara, Chapman, Bull and Nivedita. And they took him to the US, took these three patents, financed by Sara, Chapman, Bull and maintained by her for very long. And Bose ignored the patents afterwards. He did nothing to do with these patents. And he could have actually become a millionaire using these patents. Because there is one Dr. Muirhead, he's also a physicist and a friend of Bose who became an industrialist in London. And he asked Bose again and again, please let me use your instruments and you patent them and you will get a lot of royalty and with which you can build your institute which you want to and you lack finance. But Bose said no, no, no. So this is a strange, quixotic personality we come across. He has many facets of his character. When it comes to patent, he harks back to the Muni Rishis. They never restricted knowledge.
How Bose ji succeed or prepare his research into the cozy area which was allocated.
It's not a cozy area.
It's like area which you mentioned that in the research which was assigned by the British official.
Cozy means very comfortable.
Yes.
It's not a cozy area. Yes. Annexed to a bathroom is not cozy.
So I would like to read that how he succeeded in that particular area while performing the researching onto it.
Sheer willpower is the only answer I can give. He just stayed back after his regular hours. He worked in the evenings. And his cooperation from his wife, what he ate, they were living very frugally. They are wearing very frugal clothes. They are saving money for his research. And he spent his money to do research. Till after some time, he got grant from Royal Society arranged by Lord Raleigh, his teacher. But that came quite late. After about 10 years or so into his research. 10 years or 7, 8 years.
Yes, sir. Sir, the next question I would like to say. Sir, how his sister help him to achieve the level of success through the life of a teacher as well as after the life? That his sister would like to, she helped him to achieve a great amount of success through this life amount, that how he would get a great amount of success from her perspectives.
His sister's name, he had 4 sisters. The lady and whose husband, her name is, I think, Lavanya Prabha Bose, and husband's name is Ananda Mohan Bose. And when Bose refused to take his salary in the Presidency College, then he was entirely dependent on his sister and brother-in-law for his life support. He used to live in their house, he used to eat with them, they'll buy him clothes. What else does he need? So this is the contribution of his sister.
Yes. So one last question is there. Sir, how Bose would react that if all of these theories would stolen by the Marconi?
Not theory, exactly, his invention. You see, invention and theory, there is a big difference. Invention is an instrument. See, there's a famous scientist called von Karman. Von Karman gave a definition of a scientist and an engineer. That definition is that a scientist makes sense of what is. Mark me, a scientist makes sense of what is. And an engineer makes things what isn't. What isn't? What does it mean? It means he makes new things. He invents.
Yes, sir.
So Bose was a scientist as well as an engineer. So he invented many instruments. So all these instruments that I've been talking about, and in fact those 3 you can see there are those 3 patents.
Yes, sir.
They're all made by him, invented by him. So in that respect he was an engineer. He's also a scientist. So both. In fact, this line is very thin between an engineer and a scientist sometimes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. I would like to invite on stage Arvindan Neelkandanji to share his observations or insights on the book written by Sir. Please.
Actually, I wrote a review of this book in Swarajya. And when I read the book, I was under the impression that the author was someone who was as young as our author here. So that was my impression when I read the book. But when I saw him, my respect and my emotions got really moved. And when he was explaining those experiments, it is really interesting that when you are listening to a science lecture, that you can be actually moved. Thank you very much for that, sir. And coming to this particular aspect, it was not only Marconi who actually took these inventions. There was another one person called Augustus Waller, who was actually a physiologist who opposed, as Professor said, he opposed Jagadish Chandra Bose, telling that you shouldn't come inside this area of physiologists. Later, he published a paper that was very based on the demonstration that Jagadish Chandra Bose gave on the irritability of plants in Royal Institute.
Waller.
Augustus Waller, yes.
Waller, yes.
Yes. And later it was proved that it was a plagiarized work and all those things happened, but he was never punished. Now, this sets actually a pattern, and perhaps historians can actually take up this and they have to work. Like Bravehearts, you have to also talk about the scientific brains of India. I will give you one example. In 1996, the Science magazine published, which was the largest, highest frequency test that was being administered throughout the labs. It was called the Friske-Rowe experiment to find out the phosphorus in the body tissues. And it was by Yellaprada Subbarao from India who discovered it. And he was the first person to discover ATP, which is considered as a biological coin of energy. But he was denied the honor because he was from a colonized country, and so it was not considered very serious because at that time he was challenging the scientific paradigm of the time. In our own times, you had George Sudarshan. He discovered something called quantum Zeno effect, and now it is being employed today to understand how the birds fly, the magnetoreception in the brains of the birds. And when you read this newly developing field called quantum biology, you find that George Sudarshan is never mentioned. So actually, persons like him, they have their job cut out. You have to come out with another one book on 15 science brains of India also. So thank you very much, sir, for this wonderful lecture. We are all indebted to you for.
Oh, no, thank you. I'll just tell one interesting story about Ramanujan. Somebody mentioned Ramanujan. See, Ramanujan was visited, he was living in a hostel room in Cambridge with Hardy. You know that. Yeah. Now, Hardy was his friend, but of course he was living in a different hostel. The Ramanujan in a single room, and he was living there. So once Prashanta Mahalanevis, you know, the founder director of Statistical Institute, Calcutta, and also a founding figure in the science of statistics, he visited Ramanujan there, and he found that Ramanujan was sleeping with his overcoat on, with his shoes and socks on, and lying on the bed. He said, "Why are you sleeping like this?" He says, "They have not given me anything to cover. So how will I sleep in this cold? I keep my overcoat on, I put on my shoes, and then I sleep." He said, "What is this? What is the secret?" The secret is, so the ladies who prepared the bed, they used to tuck the blanket on all three sides. Only one side is left open near the pillow. From where one has to enter the enclosure and pull the blanket up to here and sleep. And Ramanujan did not discover that. He thought, there is a bed, there is nothing to cover myself with. So only way I can sleep is like this. But he was such a brilliant person. I mean, there's a book called The Man Who Knew Infinity. It is about Ramanujan. And Ramanujan was a genius. See, the equations that he proposed, where he brought them from, how many steps, nobody could understand. But when they put the test to the equations, they turned out to be right. It's an incredible genius. So again, Ramanujan, of course, nowadays people are giving credit to him. At one time, he was not given the due credit, but nowadays they give credit to him. That book is written. You may have read it. The Man Who Knew Infinity. There's a movie about it too. He was a genius, absolute genius.
Thank you so much, Kunal sir. Thank you for taking us through the inspiring journey of Sir Jagadish Chandra Bose ji, and your fresh perspective about the history of science was really helpful. It was pleasure to have you over here. And as a token of appreciation for your valuable time and contribution to Indus University and to the students of the university, I would like to request Arvindan Neelkandan sir to present a memento to Kunal sir. Please sir, can we have the memento? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I am truly honored. I do not know whether I deserve it or not, but I am truly honored. I feel great I feel gratitude towards this university.